Welcome back to the channel and another university video. This week is all about how often do you meet with your PhD students as a lecturer. Before we dive into the video content, if you are new around here, my name is Caroline. I am a physics lecturer based here in the UK. And it's that time of year again where quite often we are welcoming new PhD students into our research groups, into our departments. And I think when you're welcoming in a new PhD student, there's a bit of, expectation management, setting the rhythm of how you want the PhD meetings to go, the structure of that PhD research. And it got me thinking, how often do I meet with my PhD students? And is that typical of my discipline, and will it vary between the different subjects at a university? So I am a physics-based academic. So I specialise in researching and teaching physics, and I work within a physics department. So my PhD students are going to be working on physics-based PhDs. And when I look back at my student supervision in the past, quite often we have two supervisors. So I might be the primary supervisor or the secondary supervisor. And then sometimes we will also have industrial parties who may be part of the supervisory team. And I think the number of meetings I have with a student really is a function of whether I'm the primary supervisor, the secondary supervisor, and indeed how big that supervisory team is surrounding the PhD researcher. In the first case, where I am the primary supervisor, I tend to meet with the student, the PhD researcher, I guess the most frequently out of all the PhDs that I'm involved in supervising. So if I am the primary supervisor, I personally tend to meet with my students once a week. Now, as we are scientists, quite often we are working using laboratory facilities at the university or using computational facilities. We sit very close together, so my office is just around the corner from where the PhD research offices are, which is just around the corner from where the laboratories are. So within a typical week, I will see my PhD students fairly frequently. I'll pass them in the corridor, I can stick my head into their office just to ask them a quick question, I might pass them in our physics kitchen when they're making a cup of tea. There's lots of opportunity to have casual conversations where we get to know each other a bit, but also I can just talk casually a little bit about the work as their week is progressing. I find that's really useful, especially for a year one PhD student. I find that you tend to need it a lot less for year 2 and year 3. Often they are more independent by that point, they're pursuing their own lines of inquiry. But yeah, for year 1, it's quite handy to be physically co-located. But having that formal meeting each week is a chance for us to set objectives, to look at the tasking for that week, to reflect on any pieces of written work that were happened in the last month or recently, to look at any papers that have come out relating to that field, and for me to provide any feedback that is needed or any help or input with data analysis. I also think it's really important as well for the student to know that they're going to get at least one meeting with me a week where they get my undivided attention. I will be focused on their research and their research challenges, problems, and helping them set the direction for the next week, month, 3 months, 6 months, whatever it is, chunk of their research. I think it is very much, though, discipline dependent. I get the feeling that in the sciences maybe we have a higher frequency possibly of these face-to-face meetings. Maybe in other disciplines you can have a meeting and then you're able to set a longer period where somebody goes away and researches and then comes back to you. So let me know in the comments if you are a lecturer or a professor in a different subject and you have PhD students and you're the primary supervisor of that student, what is your frequency in meeting with that PhD researcher? As a second supervisor to a PhD researcher, I think it's really variable and can really depend on your primary supervisor. So in my role as secondary supervisor, I have been a very quiet secondary supervisor. So really I'm just tracking the student, every now and then touching base and seeing what they're up to, maybe checking in with them at their 6-monthly reviews, maybe having a quick conversation with their primary supervisor every so often, going to a couple of their research talks, but not actively involved in their day-to-day supervision. In other projects, I might be a more active second supervisor, specifically if I've been brought into the project for a specific reason. So quite often I might have a specific skill set, or I know how to operate a particular computer code or piece of equipment, and one of my roles as a secondary supervisor is to cover that bit of the project with the PhD researcher. So they will have regular meetings with their primary supervisor until they get to that needed point in their project. And then maybe as their second supervisor, I will then step in more. So it could be for a period of, say, a few weeks, maybe a couple of months. I will take a more active role in their meetings, get-togethers, data analysis, because I'm providing those kind of specific skills while I was on the supervisory team in the first place. And then maybe then I'll back off again, and then it will go back to being the primary supervisor taking the lead. I think it's really good for students to have a primary and a secondary supervisor. There is a nice amount of security there. Should the primary supervisor need to move, have a period of time away from the university, indeed change university, then the student has then the option of maybe moving with their PhD primary supervisor, and in some cases they will do, but they also may have the option of electing to stay with a secondary supervisor and actually having some continuity in their supervisory team, which may shift and change a bit, but they've got that person who knew what their project was about and has been tracking their progress. And the third dynamic, I guess, is when you've got a really strong external influence from outside the university. Now, my university regulations mean that we do need to have formally a primary and a secondary supervisor, and that primary supervisor is responsible formally for many of the processes, the reviews, the viva processes, setting the examiners as the student goes through their PhD experience. But within their supervisory team, we can have a number of external industrial sponsors or supervisors. And again, I've had projects like this, and again, it will depend on that industry sponsor or supervisor how dynamic and active their role actually is. Some industry partners like to be involved in setting the direction of a PhD project, and then maybe catch up with you every 6 months, every year, have a chat with a PhD student just to see how things are going and to help shape the next 6 months so it stays aligned maybe to their industrial interests. Some industrial supervisors may be very, very active, and they may actually host the student for a period of time within their organisation. So the student may be formally registered with the university, do some of the time at the university, but also some of the time at the industry partner. And I guess in those situations, you need to be flexible in how we're supervising the student, because obviously if the student has geographically changed location and has an industrial day-to-day supervisor acting in that industry, they may not need their university supervisor to check in with them as frequently. It may be appropriate to drop the number of primary university supervisory meetings whilst they're out undertaking their placement in industry. Or you may go the other way and say it's actually more important to continue those primary university meetings to make sure that what's happening in industry is actually good for the student and aligned to their research interests and getting their end dissertation. So again, lots of factors to take on board. For me, primary supervisor, I tend to see my students once a week. Secondary supervisor, I see my students typically less, so I will either drop in for an intensive period of time to help with something, or maybe just keep track of what the student's doing in case I need to take over and step in with the project, which has happened on a couple of occasions. And the third one is the industrial supervision. And again, I've been in groups where this has happened. I've been the primary supervisor to students having this kind of experience, and it will really depend on the needs and the kind of the financial sponsorship, etc., linked with the industry sponsor. But yeah, let me know, depending on your subject, maybe your university location, maybe the number of PhD students that you have, how frequently do you meet with your PhD researchers? And do you think it's too often? Or would you like to be able to meet with them more frequently? I'd love to know, so ping me a message. It's awesome to read the comments and see the different experiences that we're having. You know, the job roles can sound similar, but the reality is we can be quite different when we go to different locations. So yeah, leave me a comment. If you're new around here, maybe think about subscribing. We tend to have weekly academic videos, so all things university. So yeah, have, as always, a good week. Keep looking after yourselves. Enjoy the start of semester. If you're teaching or researching or indeed a student going off to university, I hope things are going well, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.